Hello, everyone. Welcome to the special event hosted by Customer Management Practices Design and Innovation Group. We are a global community of designers and innovators who are all obsessed with human-centered design. So I'm Suzanne Gibbs Howard. I am a partner at IDEO, and I'm the founder and dean of IDEO U. IDEO is a global design and innovation firm, and IDEO U is our online learning platform and growing set and suite of capability development products. And I am here today with Robin Beers, my dear friend. She is the head of the customer research and experience design practice at Wells Fargo Banks in their B2B and API digital channels. She essentially runs a full stack internal design agency there. So welcome to everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon. Today we're here from our homes to bring you a special session about women in design. We first want to recognize the chaotic state of our world and our country at this unprecedented time. But we didn't want to lose this important opportunity to connect. So, now more than ever, it's a time where it's important for people to bond together in a positive force of social change and greater equity. The frontline issues in this moment are focused on racial equity, an issue that I'm deeply committed to. So I just want to acknowledge that as women, we need to stand together and recognize the positive potential we can have at this moment, and really for the long haul. And that includes white women unpacking the privilege we receive due to systems of white supremacy. I will be talking more about that in a few weeks with Sean Nason on the podcast Disruptor Connection. It's on June 19th, so please check LinkedIn for more details shortly.
Thanks, Robin. So we want to recognize that today is about design, it's about women, leadership, and change. And I don't think anybody would deny that we already had a lot of change going on in our lives, even before 2020. We're women in the fields of design and innovation, which are full of change. We're female leaders making progress in a still typically male-dominated part of the workforce. And many of us are caregivers of some shape or form. We're expert jugglers of tasks, work, roles, identities, past, presents, futures. And in all of this change, it's really important that when times are uncertain, even more, we embrace a leadership style where we step into ambiguity, where we make progress, even in the face of adversity and complexity. We are collaborative, sensitive to differences, and embracing and respecting holistic and complex systems. And so while we don't want to say that any of these skills, mindsets, capabilities are limited to women or that all women have them, we do want to mention that there are Harvard Business Review articles and Pew Research Center studies talking about female leadership styles. And what these tend to highlight are that women are more compassionate, empathetic, willing to work through tough compromises. Women tend to pay closer attention to interpersonal interactions. Women are willing and have a greater willingness to share power and have greater transparency of information. And they often encourage participation across a greater number of team members and stakeholders than men tend to do. And so whether or not we believe these are like biologically gender-linked traits, or this is the way that society has tended to shape us because we look like female leaders, I don't think anybody would deny that these are qualities the world just needs more of in order to tackle today's most complex challenges. And so today, Robin and I just wanted to come together with this community and celebrate and spotlight what it means to lead like ladies.
Thanks, Suze. As you join, please let us know where you are today in the chat and share with the community a place where you are passionate about making a change in your work or life. And we want to learn as much from you as you learn from us today. So while Suzanne and I talk and share for the first 30 minutes or so, in the last 15 minutes, we'll answer as many of your questions as possible. So please feel free to send those in the chat as well. Thank you to the Design and Innovation Group for giving us the platform to geek out together and celebrate our decades of women in design friendship.
Cool. And I just want to shout out, we see people from Guatemala, New Hampshire, London. I saw somebody in South Africa, somebody calling in with her 9-year-old daughter, which definitely makes us happy. Switzerland, Philippines, the Netherlands, Brazil, and Oakland, California. So we're happy to have everyone here. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. So we thought we'd start out just by sharing a little bit more about each other and how we know each other. So I'll start off saying that Robin and I met in our 20s. That was just a little while
Last
ago.
week.
Yeah, and we would often be at parties, and yet we would find ourselves sitting in the corner at the party, geeking out deep in conversation about customer insights, about design for about a good hour. And then we'd make our way to the dance floor. But what this has resulted in for me is an amazing friendship where we are the best kinds of girlfriends. And at the same time, giving each other long-term committed support in our careers. And so that's been a really beautiful relationship. Robin is wonderfully unusual. She has a PhD in organizational psychology, and that led her to work in human computer interaction in the early days of the internets and startups. She worked in user research, and over the years, she worked her way forward to become the head of design and research at Wells Fargo Bank. She doesn't think of herself as a classic designer. But at the same time, she wouldn't be the head of design at B2B Digital if it wasn't for her depth in that work and her capabilities as a leader in both research and design. And by the way, now she leads a group of nearly 100 people in this design division, and most of her direct reports just happen to be female.
Suzanne, doing this podcast with you or this webinar is a dream come true. Suzanne's path also came from research. She studied cultural anthropology, especially looking at cultures in times of great change. She's also worked with tech startups and eventually found her way to IDEO. She's been at IDEO for nearly 2 decades. She's a partner. She led design research globally, ran a studio focused on systems design, and for the past 5 years has been running new ventures for IDEO focused on democratizing access globally to creative problem solving and human-centered design. In her role as partner, she currently leads a team of 40 across 3 new ventures, including a very popular podcast called Creative Confidence. I like to call Suzanne the Terry Gross of human-centered design. So let's get started. The good news for women in design is that, hey, baby, we've come a long way. But even though a lot of progress has been made, we don't yet find ourselves at parity with men. And so while we know that change takes time, we also know that now is a good time to be impatient. Today, in the wake of COVID-19 and protests brought on by racial inequity, we are more aware than ever that long overlooked social imbalances are being magnified. I'm going to talk a bit about wage gaps, but these imbalances can also lead to death. And we'll talk about that in a moment too. So let's start with the basics. According to the 2019 AIGA Design Census, 61% of designers working today are women. And the rate of creative directors across the industry rose from only 3% in 2008 to 29% in 2019. However, there's always a but. Of the designers making more than $150,000 annually, 60% are men and only 40% are women. And this tracks with national data that shows women hold just 11% of top leadership positions in the design industry.
Thanks, Robin. So I think that's a great foundation to start from. And Robin and I have also been talking a lot about why does it matter that there are women in design, especially right now? And so this is some of our thinking. What we've been talking about is the fact that we know great design and great innovation improves and is better when you embrace multiple points of view. That's the way to make positive change in the world. We also both believe that all businesses, really all institutions today, need to be inclusive of context and gender whenever they're creating products, services, systems, protocols, anything in the modern world. And then you bring into the time of today, we're in a time of rapid change. We've got a global pandemic, and we've got, especially in the US, a lot of extreme social unrest. We're not the only place in the world where that's going on. And so in a time like this, it's even more important to understand human behavior holistically when you're instituting measures, when you're designing experiences that are intended to keep families, to keep healthcare workers, to keep people of all cultures, ethnicities, shapes, colors, to keep everyone healthy and safe. And so we know that these are extremes, but in extreme cases, when there's a lack of female or a lack of diverse perspectives, situations can even get deadly. So this happens with automotive design, with personal protective equipment, and in the world of chemicals. One book that we've really enjoyed recently is by Caroline Criado Perez. It's called Invisible Women. And here she talks about the lack of having data focused on gender diversity and especially women being the single most chronically common design flaw in the world. So what she says is that if you're designing for everyone, this kind of means you end up designing for men. So some of the examples she shares, it's only since 2011 that crash test dummies have been used in automotive design. So this only happened when they started to run studies and realized that women were 47% more likely to be injured in a crash. So why is that? The crash test dummies were average proportion, but not taking into account the particular shape, size, and proportions of females. So even today, still in automotive design, you don't test with crash test dummies of both genders. It's still too expensive or considered too expensive to always test with that female crash test dummy. Other things that we've been looking at, lack of focus on separating or gender separated data affects medical studies of cancers. It affects the ways chemicals and poor chemical outcomes are focused in products, even if they're things like nail care products and things used in nail salons, which are over indexed on female customers. Criado Perez shares an example of data influencing the way that the world perceives the impact of a heart attack. And that clutching of the chest and keeling over is the way men experience heart attacks. It's not so common in women. And so that lack of data and the design of information has resulted in heart attacks often being overlooked in females. One more example, PPEs, personal protective equipment, so common in the world of design right now. There are cases where a British female police officer was killed when she was using a hydraulic ram to enter a building. Why? Because her PPE, her body armor, wasn't designed for her female body. It didn't leave room for her breasts. So she had to take it off in order to use the hydraulic ram. So yes, these are extreme cases and we could go on, but that's not the point. What the point is here is that design is ever present in the decisions we make about how our world works. It's in healthcare products, tools, services, digital social needs. It's in the ways that we think about policies and educational programs and campaigns for change, in economic recovery programs. And so we need now more than ever to discuss our roles as female leaders so that we are supporting and empowering each other so that we can not only survive, but actually thrive in the way that things are evolving in this fast time of change.
Of course, since Suzanne and I both grew up in research, we had to collect some primary data. We couldn't help ourselves. So prior to this conversation we're having, we solicited feedback from self-identified women in design through a survey. And we got many, many nuanced and rich responses to our 4 questions. And those questions were: 1, what's changing with women in design? How far have we come or not? 2, what are the benefits to having women in design? Are there any unique characteristics that you bring to the field because you are a woman? 3, what are some specific challenges you faced as a woman in design over the years? And finally, 4, what's your advice for other women in design? So we're going to unpack all of this richness with you here today. But before we dive in, it's worth mentioning that of those who took our survey, the vast majority had over 20 years of experience in the field of design. so they know what they're talking about. So let's talk about progress, not parity. Progress, not parity. There's a lot more women in design today, as I shared with you a moment ago, but not nearly as many in leadership positions. So when I think about traditional design with a capital D, these disciplines have typically been more male dominated. So I'm thinking about industrial design, interaction design, architecture, and also, we must recognize that digital design is heavily connected to engineering. I guess not even just digital design. And it still is, which is, engineering is still male dominated. But I think at least two factors have really contributed to the increase of women in design. First, over the last 2 decades, the definition of design has expanded to include not just the physical making of physical objects or building of spaces, but the creation of services, experiences, and design as a problem-solving approach that can be applied to any area of inquiry, including social problems. Second, I think design roles are now being filled with people coming from a wider range of academic disciplines, such as social sciences, journalism, library sciences. These disciplines have tended to attract more women than, say, architecture or engineering. So the increase of women in design is a lot about the expansion of what it means to be a designer itself, and that, recognizing that design goes beyond the craft of making, and understanding is really a key to great design.
So one of the next things that we talked about in our survey and asked about and got a lot of input on is, what do women think that women bring to design that's unique and positive? And so we want to be really sensitive here. We want to be clear that we're not trying to overgeneralize and say that these are gender-linked traits. We recognize that in many cases, if there are common skills and patterns, they're very likely socially constructed by the ways we are raised and the world around us. It's just a fact. And it's important to recognize that many, many great leaders, irregardless of where they fall on the gender spectrum, have these qualities in them, and we celebrate that. These are not only limited to women, and not every woman has them. All that said, here are the themes. Women tend to have more empathy and be more collaborative. Women tend to be good listeners and have a strong ability to multitask and plan systemically. And women as creative problem solvers tend to dig deeper into and approach problems from multiple different angles. And this gives them the ability to engage with systemic challenges even more holistically. And so I love all of those skills and capabilities. I think they're so incredibly valuable. And at the same time, I feel like as I say all of this out loud and connect these to superpowers that we think women might have a little more readily, I'm ready to be slammed. I'm ready for the world to critique us and say that you can't link these and connect them to females. I mean, I know Robin and I haven't conducted a full, extensive peer-reviewed study, but these are powerful common patterns that women are viewing and respecting in each other. And so I look at myself and I think about why do we feel like men in society can unapologetically absorb typical male forms of leadership like assertiveness, focus, directness, and strength? And yet I feel like I have to apologize for claiming qualities like empathy, multitasking, systemic thinking, and inclusivity. It's a reflection on myself, but also something that I share back with the women here today.
Yeah, thanks, Suze. I've been thinking about this a lot too. And one verbatim from our survey really leapt out at me, and it's around women being more comfortable with intangibles. And so this person I'm going to quote, "Design is recognized as important to the success of business. However, it's still mysterious in a patriarchal context. Women can help, and the way we can do this is because we are less afraid of intangibles and clearer about their importance." So Suzanne and I spent a lot of time talking about what does this mean? What's the value of being less afraid of intangibles. So, intangibles are things like trust, loyalty, cultural norms, emotions. They're hard to talk about in a business context, and they're even harder to measure. So a provocation I have to women in design today is, how do we make these important intangibles tangible? I believe doing this is core to women in design being more visible, more respected, and successful. And so this reminds me of a story. I asked a trusted friend in my network, he happens to be a man, what do you think I do well as a design leader? And without hesitation, he said, your superpower is your warmth. And, I knew he was right. And I felt seen and happy that he recognized this quality in my leadership. But I also felt a little like, well, I can't put that on a resume. What am I going to say at a job interview or when I go for a promotion? So, in further reflection, I may not say in a job interview, hey, I'm a really warm person, you should hire me. But I can say with confidence that people appreciate my leadership style because I'm inclusive, I'm authentic, I'm a good listener. I've built teams that do great things because I can set a vision and create an environment where people can bring their best to work. So that's an example of making the intangible tangible.
Yeah. I appreciate working with you because of your warmth. One of the things that I've been thinking about, especially in the last week, is that why do these things matter? Not everybody has the opportunity or the ability or needs to or wants to enact change on a global or a societal level. But I've been thinking a lot about how we might pay attention to the nature of our interactions every day and with every single person around us, and that things like warmth that Robin's talking about, empathy, collaboration, inclusivity, those micro interactions are so central to the change that we actually seek in the world right now. And so perhaps progress will be made when we all demand these kinds of behaviors being present in our everyday lives more constantly, and it's less about gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
That said, let's talk about some of the changes that people were talking about seeing in the workforce around them. We want to recognize that what people were saying to us was that there's lots of progress, less overt misogyny or anti-feminist sentiment. So that's great. Progress, not parity. Still, there's so much that's going on, and it's a lot more subtle and harder to see and therefore navigate. And so we wanted to elevate 3 themes that we heard to make sure that we talk about them. So patterns that we saw from women saying what they're struggling with are making sure that we're listened to and heard, avoiding being overlooked, and ensuring, number 3, that females support other females. So really quickly, we're going to tackle each of these 3 themes and provide tips.
On the first theme, how do we make sure we are heard? This came up over and over again, and I'm again going to quote one of the generous designers who filled out our survey. And she said, sexism, ageism, the never-ending mansplaining that seems to waste hours of my week. There is ingrained thinking that when a man speaks, we all must listen, but it's still okay for a woman to be interrupted and spoken over. So I was shocked at how many women brought up this challenge of being able to speak and really be heard at work. And while we were preparing for this, there was this social media post from a woman asking for advice about how to deal with men at work who say the exact same thing that she just said as if it was their ideas. And I was really struck that, I stopped tracking it after a while, but when I looked at it, she had gotten 190 responses to her request for advice. So, Suzanne, I know you think about this a lot, and neither of us ever find ourselves at a loss for words, but we definitely need to address this. So here's some tips that we've collected. So have, a short list of things to say, just, these are your mantras. such as, just allow me to finish what I was saying, or thanks, I'm almost done there. And I think, holding up the hand helps. I'm almost done. Or, don't say anything and just keep talking. Refuse to let yourself be interrupted. And to quote Representative Maxine Waters, you could just say, I'm reclaiming my time. And as for male colleagues echoing your ideas, a couple suggestions. Thank you for bringing that up again. I'm so glad you're on board with my suggestion and my ideas. Or, I'm glad to hear you agree. Finally, thank you for summarizing my comments. Another strategy that Suzanne will talk about later is, working strategically with another woman colleague. So if you've got a woman colleague who's going to be in the room and you're going into a meeting where you're sharing a lot of ideas, she could say some of these things on your behalf.
Yeah, I definitely do that with also trusted male colleagues as well, reinforcing things. Oh, what I think Suzanne was saying, or what I think Robin was trying to express was this, and kind of backing each other up. That brings us to the second part. How do you avoid being overlooked? And I want to recognize that also this might be for some of us just a barrier to feeling the right or the readiness to step up. So we know from the press that female founders don't get as much funding for startups. We know that female speakers are underrepresented on the whole at conferences, even design conferences. We know that salaries are not equal. We know that women don't get handed leadership positions as fast. We're slower to be pulled into partnerships. We're underrepresented on boards. So each time, every single one of these decisions may seem small, but clearly they add up over time and turn into big gaps. And so we also know that there's this constant tension for women between ambition and likability. People like Sheryl Sandberg and Michelle Obama have written about this. So what are the tricks for avoiding being overlooked? A couple ideas here that Robin and I have talked about. Really, somebody's asking about tips for people even younger in their career. And this is one of the things I go to. How can you be aware of your context and the role of gender in it? You don't want to be focused on it all the time, but recognize it. Think about it from time to time. Are you in a context where people might be more harshly judged for certain behaviors? That goes for things far beyond gender, but gender is a part of that. Who might be more critical? Do you have people who can be thought partners for you in this space? The second thing is to literally enlist allies. These can be men or women, it does not matter. These are people who can speak for you on your behalf and represent you. Like one time I was going for a big promotion and I had an amazing team of 3 men who were Team Sues. They advocated for me, they had my back, they represented me in conversations as part of that, said things for me that I didn't feel as comfortable saying by myself. And they became my explicit allies. And that was really key. And
Yeah, Suze,
that's important.
You said that you actually would say to your allies, will you please say these things about me?
Yeah,
Which I thought was
for
great.
whatever reason, I don't feel comfortable or I've been judged for expressing these things as to X, Y, or Z. So I think those kinds of allies are really important. And that brings me to the third thing. If you are in a situation where you overhear, you have even a sense that somebody's being unfairly judged for anything, but definitely for gender, there are graceful ways to bring this up. Yes, it depends on your context. But for example, I've had times where I've been in the space of somebody saying about a woman, I think she's a little overly aggressive. Or in a salary review, people will say, I'm not so sure she's ready for that role. And I just gracefully say, that's super interesting. I hear you, but I just want to pause for a moment and wonder if this person were a man, would we be saying these same things? Are we making room for a greater variety of leadership styles? And just sit with that and let people soak it in and let the conversation unfold.
Great. I was telling Suzanne a story about having a meeting with a male senior executive, and I was presenting work to him, and he put his hands behind his head, leaned back in his chair, and then put his feet up on the conference room table. And so when I was telling Suzanne that story, she's like, "Oh, that's called the Cobra." So next time I'm going to be like, "Hey, sir, what's up with the Cobra?" So on to our third theme. And the third theme is about other female leaders not being supportive. And this theme, and it's especially at the peer-to-peer level. And it made me sad. Suzanne, I know this isn't your experience and it isn't really mine either, as we both worked and spent a significant amount of time in organizations with strong leadership positions.
Yeah, I see it. Melissa's saying in the chat also, I feel women judge women and the harshest in some of these environments. I think we saw it play out in politics in the US that women,
Absolutely.
It's just a subtle thing. And I was thinking about this last night. I mean, I have experienced a little bit of this in my career, lightweight, like jockeying for position. And I think some of that comes from the fact that there's a sense that there might be a spot held for a woman or two. We need a woman on the board. Which one is it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
So that plays into unhealthy competitive dynamics. But here I just want to share one story, very personal one, about the way that you can celebrate other women and support them. I have a business partner. Her name's Colita Stafford, and we literally refer to each other as work wives. What does that mean? It means like we're supporting each other strategically in business and financially and economically, but we're also incredible emotional partners for each other. We care for each other beyond work. We think about our lives as moms, as taking care of our parents. We think about each other in terms of maintaining our sanity and in terms of our long-term healthy careers. So that means there might be a time where we're talking about who should do something, and I'll take one for our team and I'll say, let me do this because you haven't had an opportunity to do this other thing yet. And I want to make space for you to grow toward that. And so I challenge all of you to think about, who's your work wife? Do you have one? Who might it be? And one of the best things about this is that it's a great place where you can actually be polygamous in your life. You can have more than one work wifey.
That's great.
Okay, so we're going to get into some of the questions. So please feel free to drop them into the chat. And I'm going to look through some of these things and throw some out. Okay, so here's one from Muskan saying they're a college student. I wanted to know how to break into the field of design. Could you provide younger people hoping to pursue a career in design with ways to get into the future? Robin, what do you think on that one?
Well, I think that there are design opportunities all around you. And one great way to start building a portfolio or body of work is to do some pro bono work. Early in my career, I did user research for a nonprofit that worked with disabled adults, helping them to create art and sell their art. And that was a really, rewarding experience. So I think seeking out those opportunities just to get experience, because there's so much opportunity around.
Yeah, it's so funny because Robin and I have not ever talked about that, but my recommendation is the exact same. Build your portfolio. So that can be through work projects that you're doing while you're in school. I definitely highly recommend interning, volunteering. You don't have to do, it's great not to do something in the beginning. You don't want to commit to one thing for 20 years right out of the starting gates. But how can you dabble in a variety of things, whether that's volunteering or little bits of time here and there, so that you're building out a robust range in your portfolio. That's great. Another one from, oh yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'm maybe you were just about to read this one, but as a younger or more junior woman, it feels harder to say some of the things you suggest. I'm afraid to come off as a bitch or rude, especially when people who cut you off or repeat your ideas are your are your superiors. Yeah, that's a great point. Is this something we should just get over or push through?
Yeah, I think that's the point about context. And I think it's really important to experiment with different styles of yourself, and get feedback from others. So, one of the things that I think is really interesting is there are times where I have like a trusted group that I'm working closely with, or even not that closely, and I'll have done that thing where I didn't shut up and I just kept talking, or I'll have pushed back just a little bit and said, I actually wasn't done. Here's the point I was trying to make. And because of my personality style, I'll come forward afterwards and I'll say, oh gosh, I actually want to apologize, even though I try not to, or I just want to recognize, I was a little bit crusty in there and I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. And people will say to me, oh, I actually didn't even realize. I thought you were great. And I really appreciated you saying that. And so I think I do that because I'm trying to learn what is the real perception, what's my personal hang up. And so I think there is a little more room, and we're hypersensitive to these fears in certain cases. Sometimes they might be real. And so that's why it's nice to have a larger cohort around you of trusted people so that you can understand what's real and what's maybe your own individual concerns. I don't know, Robin, what do you think on
Yeah,
that?
I think that's great advice. I also think, using humor, people often are in their heads thinking about the next idea. And so they're not, like trying to oppress us by interrupting. Um, but, just being like, okay, I just want to finish my thought or continue what I was saying. So just let me know, trying to soften the moment a little bit, I think is part of the superpower of being a powerful woman in design.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a follow-up question here about from Adrienne on the choosing projects. Is there a strategic recommendation for choosing projects? Because I volunteer for projects that I think are interesting, but I feel like I need to strategize and select things that would build up a whole range of skills. I think your intuition there is really right. You need a mix. And I think it's really important to show a range and test things out. I think a lot of times we'll see people in design who over index on their own personal passion. That is critical in design. Don't give that up. But I think as designers in the world today, we need to make sure that we have a robust set of skills. If you're more physical, how do you attempt some things in the digital realm? If you're more into social impact, how do you make sure that you're also working on efforts that have a business angle to them? I think investing in those robust capabilities early on in your career give you a more holistic respect for the systems that we were talking about so that you can really be useful, productive, and all sorts of a greater variety of roles.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I agree, we do need to follow our passions. But, a lot of us who've been consultants, or even
Oop, I think we may have lost Robin just a tiny bit there. I am going to go on to, oh, are you back, Robin?
yeah, I'm
Oh, great.
back. Sorry.
Sorry, finish your thought, please.
Yeah, we need a wide variety. And I saw a follow-up question about asking about how many projects should be in a portfolio. I come from a Judeo-Christian background, so I always like the number three, and having those be very distinctive and different. But that's not based on anything. So
Yeah, yeah. I just like variety, so I think it is quite personal. You don't want to show absolutely everything, but just things like Robin said that show a range. We have an interesting question here from Nicole. Do you have any recommendations on how to build more awareness about gaps in leadership, pay, et cetera, for women in design and digital within larger organizations? Any community building tips? Robin, any thoughts there that you're seeing in Wells or different places?
Yeah, one of my colleagues at Wells, she may be on the line. Her name's Elizabeth Trudeau, and she started a design at Wells Fargo community of practice. And from that, I know that little offshoots of women in design and women who want to speak at conferences have formed. And I think mentorship is really important. Again, I was like dismayed to hear that women are not supporting other women to the degree that they could be. And so, having Ladies Who Lunch events every quarter or so is really important. And there's so many great groups on LinkedIn and Facebook now too of women supporting women. So looking for those as well.
Yeah, two builds I have on that. One, I've been really fascinated as so many of us have gone to working from home and we're having all of these digital forums popping up or amplifying across companies, that it's been one of the benefits has been that there's greater room for greater diversity of voices. So for example, we had an event at IDEO that was all 900 of us across the globe connecting heavily across a week in all sorts of different forums. This was 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that I noticed was how much more present women's voices were in a lot of those conversations, because they were in chat streams like the one we're having now, and women felt more comfortable, or there were more affordances for people being heard rather than just one central stage. And so all I did was comment on that and say, isn't that interesting? I'm seeing this. Is anybody else seeing that? And it was just observing something in the world that started to highlight it. I think much more strategically, Nicole, one of the things I see are surveys. There are lots of companies doing diversity, equity, and inclusion surveys inside of companies. We've done that as IDEO, and it's been extraordinarily valuable to call out some of the things that we haven't been paying close enough attention to. So a couple of years ago, we started to do things like having identity blind recruiting processes, that you don't see the person, you don't know their name, you don't know their gender, you're just assessing them. So I think there are many services coming that are helping to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion more holistically. I think we should probably go to our closing comments. We have just a few minutes left. Robin, you want to go to closing or one more question?
Yeah, just a quick comment here. I want to acknowledge sort of the vulnerability in these comments because even when we sent out the survey, I got a lot of comments back asking, is this going to be anonymous, and, how is this going to be shared? So just wanting to recognize that a lot of this, I know we are feeling sensitive about. And I think our final comments, kind of address this.
Yeah, so I think thank you. I know we're excited about the fact that the world is changing, and we're hearing so much from many more women wanting to step up more confidently and take the lead, and still do this in ways that they're leading like ladies. So we have 4 little tips to wrap us up.
Yeah. Stop apologizing. Don't say, I'm sorry, even if, it's like a weird tick we have. So many of us do this. Try to get that out of your vocabulary.
Yeah, we all struggle with that. Second tip is ask yourself, what would a man do? I literally have a particular guy who I work with for years. He's not a bad guy. He's awesome. But he tends to say yes to everything, never really covers it off holistically, and still takes the credit. And so I ask myself, what would do if I'm trying to think through, am I going to say yes to an additional level of responsibility or not? And sometimes that question gives me the confidence to go ahead and say yes in something that I might be doubting myself.
Yeah. Stick together. We have got to stick together. Hold space for others to rise up. Allie Love, who's one of Suze's Peloton teachers, said, "Our differences make us unique, but our desire to do better brings us together." And all of us in design, I think, have a desire to make the world a better place. So especially if you're a person of privilege, like I am, how might you use that to support others around you?
Yeah. Last thing, we're wrapping up, but finally, we just want to ask everyone to stay in the game. Don't give up. We need strong women like you. We need people who have resilience, who have perseverance. Everyone needs us, in all honesty. And it may seem like some of the times we're not making progress, but over time, all of these little shifts are really meaningful. And together, we're having impact.